This lecture will begin the second mod and the survey portion of this course. During the survey, I won't attempt to repeat what is in the book. I'll actually take a look at a very few artists and styles of rock and roll from the standpoint of different perspectives. Certainly, we will talk about those artists who have made the most innovations in the music. The first two artists that we will speak to are Bill Haley, who is considered the first rock and roller, and Elvis Presley. Bill Haley was born in Detroit, Michigan in 1925. As a child, he was moved to Chester, Pennsylvania with his parents. Haley started playing music at a very early age and became quite a passable guitar player. And in fact, during his teenage years, became a regular in Western swing country bands. During this period, the bands that he played with were the Saddlemen and a band that he led himself called the Four Aces of Western Swing. During this same period, Haley during the day quite often took jobs with radio stations. During the late 1940s and early 1950s, it was not yet the practice of recording companies to send promotional records to radio stations for promotional purposes, airplay not being the primary promotional medium for records. Motion pictures had been the primary entertainment for Americans since the end of World War II. During the late 1940s, 1950s, records were promoted through initial performances in the motion pictures. Some record companies, however, were already starting to send out promotional copies of their records, hoping that the radio airplay would push the sales. Even the odd rhythm and blues record would make it to some of these stations. And while many of these rhythm and blues records were not played over the white stations around the country, quite often what the station manager would do was toss these records onto a table in the back of the station for any of the employees at the station to pick up and take home. It was Haley who picked up many of the rhythm and blues records that were thrown on those tables. He took them home and really took them to heart. By 1950 and 1951, Haley had changed the name of his group to Bill Haley and the Comets, and his music was a very odd conglomeration of Western swing country music and rhythm and blues. Haley began to record in the early 1950s and became very quickly popular with many of his fans up and down the eastern seaboard. In 1952, he recorded a cover version of a tune called Rock the Joint. The song sold about 75,000 copies. It wasn't a big enough seller to make it onto the recording charts, but it certainly sold enough to call this tune perhaps the first rock and roll hit song. In 1953, another tune called Crazy Man Crazy became his first charted seller. By this time, Haley has developed his formula for success. He did cover versions of rhythm and blues tunes that had already been made popular by other black groups, and he developed stage routines which were much more elaborate than most of the other white artists of the period. While Haley himself did not move much on stage, the musicians behind him assumed incredible poses and did dance steps that attracted the attention of the audience. In 1954, Haley and his band recorded another cover rhythm and blues tune called Rock Around the Clock. The tune did not become an immediate hit, but with its choice by the producers of a movie in Hollywood called The Blackboard Jungle as the theme song for the title sequence in the movie, it was a song that represented the era of the teenager. It very quickly became a huge fan favorite and went up the charts, making the tune one of the biggest hits of the year. Riding the crest of popularity because of Rock Around the Clock, in 1956, Haley and his band were asked to be the stars of another Hollywood movie called, oddly enough, Rock Around the Clock. A second movie followed it up called Don't Knock the Rock. In both of these movies, however, Haley and his band were shown up quite quickly by other rock stars, including the young artist Little Richard, whose stage act was so elaborate and so impressive, it virtually ran Haley off the screen. By 1957, Haley's popularity in the United States had completely waned. His managers, trying to revitalize his career, booked him on a tour of Britain and the European continent. He was a smash in England and on the European continent, but oddly enough, none of this popularity transferred back to the United States. From the late 1950s on, Bill Haley was a relatively minor rock and roll figure, playing only rock and roll revivals and the occasional nostalgia show. He died in 1981 from complications of a brain tumor. One of the biggest puzzles of Bill Haley was why, after having his star rise so quickly in the mid-50s, did it fade so much more quickly in 1956-57. It was quite probably because of several factors. Remember, I mentioned that he was born in 1925. This is probably the most important detail as we start to discuss his fading from glory. When he started playing rock and roll, which of course was rhythm and blues played by a white musician, you should remember that he had a formula in mind. He continued using that formula during the early to mid-50s over and over and over again in all of his tunes. The formula consisted of rhythm and blues cover tunes played in a 12-bar blues form. He almost always used a stop time, which is a series of breaks during either the beginning of the tune or the beginning of every chorus. His producers took the lyrics from those rhythm and blues tunes that had originally been done by black musicians and had all sorts of sexual inferences in them, and they removed the sexual inferences, creating songs that would not be offensive lyrically either to the young teenage white audience or their parents. Haley also had a problem with the comparisons that were made between his stage act and the stage act of other rock and roll idols. Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, and others were very active performers, moving around on stage, dancing, and keeping the focus visually on themselves during their performances. Haley, on the other hand, stood very still in front of the microphone, singing his songs, playing his guitar, while the band behind him on stage was doing fantastic poses and dance steps. But it was another comparison that probably was the biggest problem for Haley. Remember, I said that he was born in 1925. Elvis Presley was born a full decade later in 1935. By 1956-1957, Haley was 32 years old, and if you've seen him in pictures or in videos, you would see that he looks quite a bit older than that. He probably looked like an old man to his teenage audience, with Elvis Presley moving around the stage at 20 or 21, Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry both being young musicians as well. They exuded a youthfulness that Haley couldn't compete with. But to go back to the most important point in the discussion, Haley was the innovator. He is still considered the first rock and roller, the first guy who brought rock and roll into a white medium.